my experience in Buffalo, not the greatest. They didn't like people coming into their area and investing. So I had problems with contractors. I had problems with neighbors.
When you switched over, you didn't only switch over back to Canada, but you also switched your investment strategy. What was that sort of mindset from flipping to small multifamily?
Mainly the amount of I just wanted something that was a little bit more passive.
How do you balance those roles between investor and realtor?
I find being a realtor gives me the flexibility more so than any other career probably would, or at least being an entrepreneur does.
Joining us today is Taylor Morgado. Taylor, can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, how you got started in real estate, and your journey to this point?
Yeah, for sure. So I am a real estate investor and also an investor-focused realtor. I started investing in real estate when I was 19 years old. I started because I originally wanted to go to law school, and I was saving up. I worked 3 jobs in high school and university to save up for law school. And then during like my second or third year of university, I realized I absolutely don't want to be a lawyer. And so I was like, okay, what do I do with this money that I've saved up? Because I want to make a smart investment. And so I started looking into real estate investing, and I ended up buying property in the US as my first property ever because Buffalo was all I could afford. I didn't have a full-time job. Although I had like 3 part-time jobs, I still couldn't qualify for a mortgage, and I couldn't afford anything in the GTA where I lived. So started looking around, and Buffalo ended up being the place that I chose to invest, and did a flip. So bought it cash, paid for the renovations, flipped it. It kind of went okay. There was obviously some hiccups, and then kind of rinsed and repeated. And once I had enough money and a full-time job here after university, I brought the money back to Canada, and I bought a 4-plex and a triplex in Ontario. And that's kind of how I got started.
Okay, so the reason going into the US was just purely based on price point, right?
Yeah, it was strictly price point. And I know now the US is such a hot place to invest.
Yeah.
And now there's financing options, but this was like 10 years ago, and I was 19. Like, I had no idea what I was doing. So the idea of even qualifying for a mortgage, I had no idea. And so I just bought where I could pay cash, and that was the place.
And at the time, were you in Canada? So was this like long distance or?
Yeah,
what?
so I lived in the
Okay.
GTA, and I would just commute back and forth to monitor the flips. I'd like be calling a bunch of realtors. I'd go there for showings. It was driving distance, so it was like 2.5, 3 hours for me.
Okay.
But
It's not
it
bad.
was, yeah, I mean, it's like driving to Muskoka here or something. It was just the border crossings that were a little bit annoying, but yeah.
So having dabbled in the US and then come back to Canada, what were some key differences that you personally observed between the two markets?
Yeah, so I mean, I only have experience in the Buffalo and Buffalo surrounding areas. I can only speak to that. I know there's a lot of investors in like Texas and Florida now. I can't speak to that, but my experience in Buffalo, not the greatest. I think that's why I came back to Canada. I mean, the prices were very low, and a lot of things are public record there, so it was easy to get information. So like the way I found houses was I had a realtor there. Well, I had multiple realtors, but then also just email blasts. So I was able to find homeowners and their contact information and actually blast them. So by mail and email and calls. So I would like actually write letters, handwritten letters to hundreds of people, send them every few weeks. And I did get some calls back. So that was a positive. In Canada, unless you're a realtor or a lawyer or maybe a mortgage agent or broker, I'm not sure, you can't really get information on homeowners here because it's more classified than in the US. So that was one pro. Cons, though, in Buffalo, they can recognize if you're Canadian from like a mile away. So they can tell by the way you speak. My license plate obviously gave it away as well. And so I feel like that made it a little bit more difficult for me because I wasn't investing in downtown Buffalo. It was more like the outskirts. So like Mississauga is to Toronto here. And they didn't like people coming into their area and investing. Even though I was buying foreclosures and houses that were abandoned and you were trying to fix them up, they didn't like it. They felt like you were coming into their territory. You had like all this money because you must if you're buying houses here. And they just didn't like it. So I had problems with contractors. I had problems with neighbors. It was just that aspect was a con for sure. Whereas investing here, you don't really get that. Like, yes, there's people who don't like landlords here because, oh, you're wealthy and you're taking advantage, but it wasn't the same as investing somewhere where they knew you were from a different country.
Yeah, I get that. I fully get that.
Yeah.
And not good job highlighting the pros and the cons. Funny story is actually because like when I started out, I was like on the wholesaling end, and I actually someone saw my number and they were like, "This isn't a number from Edmonton; it's from Lac La Biche," which was where I was prior to that. And they were like, "Go back to Lac La Biche," and then they hung up.
Yeah, see, people don't
Okay.
like you coming into their territory at all. Not at all.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
other thing, the other pros I would say, was that houses are a lot cheaper, or at least they were. I'm not really up to date on the Buffalo market right now, but at the time they were significantly cheaper. Like you could buy a foreclosure for 40,000 US, whereas here that's like a down payment on a condo, right? So the barrier to entry there was a lot lower, which is a huge pro. And then the other pro too was that foreclosures work differently than here, where it's power of sale in Canada. And so power of sales, they still want to get market rate when they sell because you're dealing with like the banks typically. Whereas in the US, they don't really care about market, or at least in New York, where I was in Buffalo, they don't care about market. They just want to get their money back.
Nice job highlighting that. Now, tell me, when you switched over, you didn't only switch over back to Canada, but you also switched your investment strategy. What was that sort of mindset flip from flipping to small multifamily? What
Yeah.
drove that decision?
Mainly the amount of work that had to go into it. So at this point, I was working full time, and my job it took a lot of my time. Like I was working 60 to 80 hours a week at my full time job. And so I just wanted something that was a little bit more passive rather than so active. And a flip is definitely active, especially when you're doing it out of country. At the time, I tried my best to learn how to build a team and build a team, but you couldn't really trust it as much, I would say. Like I had problems with contractors. So it was a lot of babysitting. Whereas if I bought something that had tenants in it, yes, it wasn't a brand new building. It still required work, but it wasn't as much work on a weekly basis as monitoring a flip. So that was the intention there.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Yes, flipping it's purely active, and
Yeah.
you have to oversee the whole thing, make sure you stick into timelines, and because it can get out of hand pretty quickly. At least you went in with cash, so there wasn't the financing cost behind it, but still.
Yeah.
Okay, so you went from the flip aspect. You're like, well, I want to get a rental, and you decided, you know what? I don't just want to get one unit. I'll rather go 3-4 units at a time. What was the driving factor on that end? Were you living in any of these units? Were you house hacking, or was it just purely a rental?
No, I wasn't house hacking, although I thought about it. I was aware of what house hacking was when I decided to buy here. But honestly, it was just the numbers. Like I was thinking about if I were to just buy a condo for myself versus a triplex or a fourplex, maybe a little further out of where I'd want to live. It made a lot of sense because if I were to buy a condo myself for the same price as I bought one of the buildings for, I would have no cash flow. I would be out of pocket like thousands a month because you have the mortgage and the maintenance fees and all that kind of stuff, right? And so I just thought, well, instead of doing that, might as well buy something that does cover all the expenses and cash flow a little bit on top of that. And then if I want to, I can go rent for myself somewhere here because I live in Toronto. And it was cheaper that way because if I was buying a condo, I was looking at like 5,000 to 6,000 a month. Whereas if I rented at the time, it was like 2,000, like 1,700, I think. So it was a significant difference. And I just found that was the smarter way to go about it for me at that time.
I find that's a big question amongst investors is renting where you live versus owning where you live, kind of thing, right? But I'm sure it's also just market specific.
Yes. And as a realtor, I get asked why I rent all the time. People think it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of being a realtor, how do you balance those roles between investor and realtor?
Yeah. So I don't really put a ton of time into the investment space anymore as I had when I first acquired the buildings. I do
Yeah.
have other property, but it's more passive. Like, yes, there's times where I'll have to deal with a tenant turning over or work on the house, but it's not every single day that I need to address something. So I find that being a realtor being a realtor takes a lot of my time, but because it's more flexible than, for
Yeah.
example, my old job, which was corporate, it's easier to work around it. So like if I need to go to the properties for a couple days and work on them, or I need to drive up last minute because something happens, I have the flexibility to do that because I'm working with my own schedule. Of course, my clients, like I do prioritize them, but like if something urgent comes up, I can do that. So I find being a realtor gives me the flexibility more so than any other career probably would, or at least being an entrepreneur does.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And you can always make up your hours elsewhere, right?
Exactly.
Um, Question regarding your portfolio currently, how far out is it spread? Like what markets are you in?
Yeah, so I've kept it in Canada. Although I plan on going back to the US, I still have all the US corporate structure set up. I never got rid of that because I figured I'd probably re enter the US at some point. So I have Alberta and Ontario right now.
Where in Alberta, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, so right now, Calgary. Although I've looked in Edmonton.
Calgary. Oh yeah.
Yeah, I've looked in Edmonton, but right now it's just Calgary. I do plan on expanding into Florida pretty soon, hopefully, like within the next year. Just can't do the Canadian winters anymore. So
I get that. I
yeah.
get that. I
Yeah.
mean, we almost in May and there's literally snow outside here in Edmonton. So
Oh my goodness. Yeah. See, we don't have snow
crazy.
here, but it's been so dark and so rainy this winter. I'm like, I just need sun. So if I can get some property out in Florida, whether that's like a short term rental or a multifamily, I'm exploring the options of both. At least I can be out there more.
Yeah, no, I fully get that. Now, tell me, with your current rentals that you have, are you managing them all? Are you managing the one year in Calgary from afar? What does that look like?
Yeah, so the Calgary is pre-con right now. So I'm still waiting for that to close. I
Okay.
do have property management set up for that one when it does close. So it should be closing this year, unless there's delays, because you know how construction is. And then the ones in
Yeah.
Ontario, I have a property manager, but I tend to find myself managing more than I'd like to. So, you know how it goes. But I do have a property manager on the ones here.
Yeah, you manage the tenant or you manage the property manager, right?
Yeah, pretty
Now
much.
for those newer investors who are like pre-con, what is that? Would you mind just explaining what it is, diving a little deeper in that?
Yeah, so pre-con is just short for pre-construction. I bought the property there 2 years ago. It was I actually got connected to it through me being a realtor because I was selling units for the developer there. And got the pricing list before it was released. And I was just like, holy smokes, like that is amazing pricing. And they were only asking 5% down. So 5% down. And then I think it was another 5% a year later. And then that's it. That's all you need to put down. So I was like, this is amazing. It's kind of like a built in savings plan. And so I just went with
Yeah.
it because I'm like, I can either assign it because there was one free assignment in it, or I can close on it and either rent it out long term or short term because there's no restrictions right now on that there in that particular building. and it was in like an up and coming area. So that's why I chose to go the pre-con route for that. It is the only property I've bought that's new and pre-construction. And I don't know how it'll pan out. We'll see when it closes. It's been a very interesting time. Like I bought it 2 years ago and things have changed a lot in 2 years. So we'll see if
Yeah.
it was a good investment or not.
So I'm guessing this wasn't planned at all. The numbers just looked too good not to participate in this one, essentially, right?
Yeah, I think I thought about it for maybe 10 minutes and then decided to pull the trigger on it. I was in a position where I had the money just sitting there and I was like, I don't know, like, sure, why not? It looked like a good decision. Like obviously I ran the numbers. I didn't make an uneducated decision, but
Yeah.
it looked good. And so I was like, okay, let's do it. And right now, based on the pricing in Calgary, based on the rents, like I think it will be a good investment, but still things can change between now and closing. So we'll see.
Absolutely. Now, you sort of fully immersed in the real estate realm. What would you say is like the most rewarding aspect about being involved in real estate for you personally?
I would say from the investor side, it would be that's a good question. It would be providing housing, and also not just providing housing, but like providing safe and up to standard living for people because I never like I was very lucky growing up. My family gave me a very like I was middle class, so very safe environment, nice home, never really worried, right? And then as I got into the investment space, specifically when I started looking at Buffalo, I realized I cannot believe the living conditions that some people have to deal with. And a lot of those people, they're not homeowners, they're renters, and the landlords just don't really keep up with the property. Maybe they're far away, they don't really know what's going on, whatever it may be. But I was just astonished by what people were living in. And then when I started looking here, I realized, okay, this is also a Canadian problem. It's not just a US problem. And so just being able to provide people with housing where like they can live to a standard of living that, maybe they couldn't have before. And then from a real estate like sales side, I would say just being able to help either investors buy their first property. I love helping first time investors because it's like such a great way to start building your wealth, whether it's for you, for your kids, and just getting them into homes and investment properties that they love.
Yeah, I completely agree on both ends there. Um, yeah, I just wanted to see what your answer would be on that. Now, quickly going back to the pre-con, one question that I have, and I'm sure a lot of new investors are thinking this is, how could they go about ensuring that they really check all the boxes when they're doing their due diligence? What would you recommend for that?
Yeah, I would definitely read through the entire contract. That's a start before signing it. I've seen many people just sign things and not actually have a lawyer review or them even read through it in detail. And I
Yeah,
think that that's where a lot of oversight happens because there's clauses in there. The builders are the ones who have the contracts ready. You're not creating the contract, right? So it's more in favor of the builder. So you just want to make sure that you're comfortable with it and that you know where your money is going, you know who this builder is, doing due diligence on the builder and making sure like they've done projects before, how those have panned out. Because even in like Toronto, there's been a lot of buildings that have gone under, gone into receivership, and you don't want that to happen to you because it's hard to get your deposit back when that does happen. And who knows how long it'll take to get it back, right? So just doing due diligence on the builder and I would say looking through the contract or a start.
yeah, I agree. That's a very important one. Even for primary residences, if you're buying a new build, just do your due diligence on the builder themselves, the quality
Yeah,
of work that they do, the reputation, how many times they've done this, all of that.
exactly.
Question for you: how do you cultivate and maintain strong relationships with clients, colleagues? And I'm sort of going off on a tangent here, but I just want to see what your take is on that.
Yeah, so I would say whether you're an investor or a realtor or just an entrepreneur in general, or you're not, but you have the goal to be one of those three, networking's like the biggest thing that I can suggest. Going into rooms with people that you don't know, talking to them, introducing yourself, but not in a salesy type of way. Like, don't just go into a room and say like, "Hey, I'm Taylor. How do you like me now? Like, this is what I do, blah, blah, blah." Yeah, like you actually want to genuinely get to know people and ask
Yeah.
questions and build a relationship. You don't just want it to be one-sided. So that would be one thing. And you can find investor groups, networking groups, honestly, everywhere. Like, there's so many different sites, Eventbrite, Meetup, I think it's .com or .ca, I can't remember. Facebook, like they have a ton. And start adding yourself into like Facebook groups with topics of interest. That was what I would say. And then following up and like keeping in contact with those people is also important. You don't want to just show up to an event, have a great conversation with somebody, think they're like a really cool person, and then forget about them the minute you walk out of the room. Add them on Facebook or grab their number or follow them on Instagram, follow their YouTube channel. I don't know, whatever it may be. Check in on them, wish them a happy birthday. Just little things that I feel like we've kind of lost as the years go by, that sense of just communication and relationship building. And I think it goes a really long way. Like, even for my clients, I literally send them a birthday card with a Starbucks gift card to every single client for every single birthday. And it doesn't matter if they were my client 3 years ago or if they're my potential client and have never bought with me. I acknowledge their birthday. I acknowledge holidays, every single holiday. All my clients get, some sort of gift during the Christmas/holiday season. And then I touch base with them. I'll send them a voice note or I'll give them a call or text. Doesn't always have to be hard, but just keeping in touch. And I've had so many clients reach out, or even potential clients, and say like, nobody does this. This is so nice. I felt so special. Like, who gets a card in the mail anymore, right? So it's just like little things like that. And you don't have to be a realtor to implement things like that. Like, just even writing on someone's Facebook, happy birthday, it makes them feel special.
I fully agree with that. Firstly, going back to the networking factor is, like they say, the more hands you shake, the more money you make. And it's all about building those relationships and then cultivating it. You threw a lot of gold in there because a lot of little tips on keeping the relationship going though. But yeah, it's all about that relationship building. So no, I love that. I love that for myself personally as well. And like one thing I try and do as well is for birthdays is send people like personal short little videos wishing them happy birthday.
Oh, that's nice. I like that.
Yeah, so it's not just like a generic happy birthday on the wall. Like, I'll just maybe DM them or send them a video of myself quickly wishing them happy birthday. But you're absolutely right. It's all about that relationship and cultivating it. And it doesn't have to be as a realtor. It can be just as an investor, because ultimately, in general, the more you can cultivate your network, just the better off you're going to be, right? There's a lot of pros to that.
100%.
Yeah, sorry. Now, speaking about like things that people can implement, what are some common mistakes? Because you said you love working with new real estate investors. What are some common rookie mistakes you see amongst the newer investors?
Not understanding how to run numbers. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
one. I would say get really familiar with just running, asking for financials, first of all, not being afraid to ask for financials on potential properties. Really analyzing those financials, seeing what they're missing, adding in costs that because I can tell you as a realtor, when you request financials from a listing agent, it is always missing something like the lawn and snow. I don't know, just like property management fees, for example. If you're property managing, even if you're not property managing and you're managing it yourself, you should be putting something in there for that. A reserve fund. Like, none of the financials that you would get from a listing agent, and it's not their job, frankly. So, but just making sure that you are aware of what you need to add, what your true costs will be, and understanding what the type of income you're getting from the property, not just the rents, but is there, I don't know, coin laundry? Is there parking that's additional that you can charge for that's not being utilized? Is there a shed or storage? Things like that, and making sure you have the full picture. So I would say financials are one. The other is I'm sure you've heard this many, many times, but analysis paralysis. Like
Oh yeah.
people just get stuck and they're scared to make a move. And I would say the numbers don't lie. If the numbers make sense, what is holding you back? Obviously, you have to look into like the area and stuff and make sure that that's all good. But if it makes sense on paper, don't get in your head too much about it. If you're really serious and you have the money, or you have a joint venture partner who has the money and you want to get into real estate, don't let other people talk you out of it just
Yeah.
because, you're scared.
No, I fully agree. I said the same thing to new investors that I work with is get comfortable running the numbers, because if the first deal I send you is a fantastic deal, when you run the numbers, you won't even really know it. Even if it shows it on paper, you don't have the confidence to
Right.
say that this is a fantastic deal. But if you've done it a few times and a good deal crosses your plate, when you run the numbers, something looks different. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then another thing that I like to tell my investors before we get into negotiating is let's figure out what price point we're aiming for. Of course, the lowest price we can get, the better. But let's see what our maximum is and know this
Mm-hmm.
beforehand before we get into the negotiating. Because I find they move one of two directions: either they start like restricting that number and they start bringing it down, or they start pushing the number to try and make the deal work. And now they start getting into that danger zone. So if you can figure out that hard limit ahead of time, before we get into the negotiation, before things potentially get a little bit more emotional, it sort of helps keep you on track and just keep it all about the numbers, right?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. Don't like
Yeah.
the numbers don't lie at the end of the day, right? Like if you're pushing that number out and you're like, oh, well, I can maybe do it somewhere else or bring in the money or the difference somewhere else, numbers don't lie, stick to them. So I agree.
One thing I like to do is highlight the wins as well as the losses, just so that people know exactly, they have a realistic expectation going into real estate investing, right? Um, what would you say is the most valuable lesson that you've learned from a deal that maybe didn't go as planned? And this could be with you and a client or you personally on the investing side. What's
Mhm.
a lesson that really, really stands out for you?
I think the number one lesson I've always stood by is follow your gut. I think that no matter what it is in life, investments, being a business owner, anything, if you don't follow your gut and you ignore the warning signs, you usually end up regretting it. And I definitely have found that in my investment journey. I've not trusted myself when it came to hiring contractors, and I've had contractors walk off the job with like a 50% deposit, which was also another lesson learned. Give smaller deposits. I've, you know, private lended to investors that I didn't really know as well. And my gut was giving off warning signs. And, with the climate right now in the investment space, there's
Yeah.
always a risk. So you have to be really in tune with your body and like your gut and listen to it and be aware of the warning signs. So I know that that's such a generic thing, but you usually know when your gut's telling you something's off.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And over time, your gut just gets a little bit more fine-tuned, right? Because it becomes a little easier subconsciously to notice these patterns and red flags. Um, but yeah, there's just something about going with your gut feeling. So tell me, we've spoken about where you've come from and your journey to this point. What's in store going forward for you? You said potentially going out into the US, maybe going into a short-term rental or something along those lines. But is that for you to be able to branch out over into the US and move there yourself? What's the plan?
Yeah, that's a good question. Still trying to figure it out day by day.
Yeah,
I definitely don't. My goal is not to live in Canada full time for the rest of my days. I definitely want to live somewhere warmer. Right now, I think the easiest path is the US, because, first of all, we have a dog, and so it's just easier to travel there for an extended period of time. Secondly, there's a lot of opportunity in the US. And, I live in Ontario and the landlord tenant board is very strict here. There's a lot of negatives I find to the Ontario real estate space right now. Appreciation is a positive, a huge positive, but there's some negatives. So that's probably the next move, is just figuring out what type of investment in the US and then acting on that, and definitely living there like a couple months, probably like 3 to 4 months of the year at some point. And then in terms of future, just real estate business, just growing my portfolio, diversifying my portfolio. I've definitely tried to diversify it as much as I can as I've started, from private lending to multis to flips. Just really trying to make sure that if one investment goes sideways, my entire portfolio is not. And growing the real estate business, my boyfriend and I, we just teamed up as realtors, and we're really focused on growing that so that we can go to the US for a certain amount of time of the year and still have our business going here. So there's a lot in the works, but really all still in the real estate world. I love real estate and I don't ever see myself getting out of that space. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. Coming into real estate full swing was probably one of the best decisions I made. Okay, yeah, that's exciting though. That's
Yeah.
really exciting. No, so tell me, on the multifamily side, do you have any that sort of crossed that threshold into the commercial side? Do you have anything more than 5 units?
No, I've looked at properties, I've analyzed properties, but I haven't actually crossed into that space yet. Almost did, because two of my properties were on the same title. They were neighbors and it was an estate sale. So the combined total would have been over, but we were able to get them separately titled upon close, so didn't have to. But I will be going into that space. It's inevitable. I mean, there's only so much borrowing power.
Yeah.
And, it makes sense to go the commercial route. So definitely have my eyes on that, but I just don't know if it'll be on the Canada side or the US side.
Yes. No, that makes sense. That
Yeah.
makes sense. No, Taylor, it's time for one of my favorite segments of the show, called it Time Capsule. So let's imagine that you stumbled across a time machine that allows you to travel back and forth in time. You can't change anything, but you can give and receive advice from your older and younger self. So first, let's go back to your 18th birthday, which I'm guessing was not too long ago. What advice would you give your younger self with the knowledge you have now? Now, this can be business, investing, familial, like anything in general.
Yeah.
What advice would you give your 18-year-old self?
Wow. 18. That
Yeah.
was a while ago. Let me just clarify. um, I would probably say don't make decisions for others, because I think that a lot of my life and in business and personal, I've made decisions that I think would make, or that I thought would make other people happy or proud. And I think that I stayed in jobs and relationships and did things that, weren't, I outgrew or weren't for me anymore, but I stayed in them because I didn't want to upset people. And so
Yeah.
that took a toll on my health, like big time. And I think that that's one piece of advice that I would give to my 18-year-old self.
You know what, Taylor? I've asked a lot of people this question, and so far that's the one that hits home the hardest. Because I think that's the quickest way to just being unhappy, is trying to make decisions to please everyone else and not be true to yourself. And that's something that came with age for me as well, is because that's something I did at a younger age. And eventually I got to the point where it's like the decisions I'm making are purely based for me and my happiness. Like, I don't
You
care if
have
other
to.
people like it or don't like it. And that was the quickest way for me to sort of flip that script and just live a more fulfilling, happy life. So, wow, I love that one. Now let's go ahead to your 80th birthday. What advice do you imagine your future self would offer your current self at your present age?
I know the answer to this one. It stands out to me so clearly. Um, I think I'd probably say to myself, enjoy the moments more, be more present. I think as a business owner, it's very easy to get wrapped up in, work is your whole life. And so you end up missing events or being at events, but not really being present because a deal's going sideways or you have a fire you have to put out. And so, yeah, I think it would be being present and like really spending time with loved ones and being in the moment.
Yeah, I think that's probably the most common one, and honestly, it's because it's true, right? Is it's so easy to get wrapped up in the day to day, and life just goes by pretty quickly.
It
And
does. Yeah.
yeah, no, that's what I try and remind myself very, very, very often. But it's true. It's very, very true.
Yeah, it is.
Now, Taylor, for those people out there, I'm going to be leaving all your contact info or the best ways to reach you in the description below. But just for the people who are currently driving and listening, what would you say is the best way for listeners to connect with you?
Yeah, probably Instagram. I'm on that the most. So it's Taylor Morgado _ I think. I'm pretty sure. And yeah, that or just honestly my phone. I'm pretty good with text and stuff. So I don't know if you want to leave that information or just my social. But yeah, I'm on my phone a lot. Back to the last point where I'm constantly putting out fires and stuff. So yeah, definitely the best way to get a hold of me.
Life of a realtor. No, I get it. And yeah, any and all info that you are comfortable leaving, I'll leave that down in the description, and people can just
Perfect.
click away and find a way to connect with you. Taylor, I want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing today. I've
Thank
really,
you.
really enjoyed this.
Yeah, this was awesome. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for tuning in to the Wealth Through Real Estate show. If you want to learn more about private lending deals, then you definitely want to tune into my episode where I interview Serena Holmes. This is your host, Alray Noble, signing off.